fellow patrons. Rob Caskie, proudly engaging in storytelling, and I'm so grateful to you for your ongoing support on the storytelling journey that we share together. It is often said on the online mediums, and indeed I'm being encouraged all the time to share more about myself and my life rather than just the stories I tell about yesteryear. And it would be fair to say that I went to school at Howick High School. Happy time in my life, bittersweet in many ways after the death of my mother at the very beginning of my standard 6 year. And I always wanted to move back to the Natal Midlands for many reasons. I love the climate here. I love the dairy farms, the maize farms, the potato farms. I love the proximity to the Drakensberg and to waters abounding with trout. I like the proximity to King Shaka Airport and indeed to the highway to get up to Johannesburg. And of course it leaves me within striking distance of the battlefield, so I can still conduct battlefield tours from here. But most of all, I love the people here in the Natal Midlands who have always cosseted me, and I feel that they are one of us, and I indeed am one of them. And I always wanted to come back to this wonderful, wonderful part of the world. A great friend of my father's, who is in remarkable shape for his age and lives here locally, was to write this about living or moving into a retirement village for which Howick has become so famous. And I quote from his little journal: "Village living requires a totally new outlook on life. I always vowed that I'd never move off the farm. Eventually I decided the time was right. I was now old, and when I fell off the perch, my wife would be left to live alone and have to pack, and generally it would be unfair on her. We bought at Amber Valley and moved. There are obvious differences which we are faced with every day. If you take a dog with you on a walk, it has to be on a lead. The garden must be fenced. You have to take a packet or multiple packets to pick up and carry the dog turds home with you. So for me, no dogs. Find a home for fudge. You're not allowed to go outside and pee in the garden. This now is a serious indignity. You can only drive at 30 kilometers an hour, and you have to have room for 1,000 things you've accumulated over 70 years. You now have near neighbours. You have rules. Farmers have never had rules, or rules by which they obeyed anyway. You have wild animals inside your garden that eat everything. You may not shoot them. You may not shoot your neighbours. You have to cook, you have to wash dishes, you have to sweep. The pluses are lock up and go, no cows to milk, no labour to fight. You don't have to lock anything. You don't have to wake up to strange sounds during the night. You do not, or you should not, have farm attacks. You have frail care when your wife breaks her leg. And isn't it interesting to note that the retirement facility that Howick has become, with its first developed retirement villages to the more modern ones like Amber Ridge, in which we live, and Amber Lee, that are more lifestyle villages than they are retirement villages, create a wonderful, wonderful atmosphere of community living. And there certainly is a fair amount of compromise and give and take involved. And I always like to remind our immediate neighbours that I'd far rather hear from them than hear from the body corporate were there to be a problem. And we as a result host a street braai every year on our street, right here on the roadway and the driveway outside of our home. We provide the braais and put up some gazebos and tables and chairs, and our neighbours bring their food and drink and cutlery along, and we have a wonderful, wonderful time together. It normally begins around noon, and at times we've had to ask guests to politely find their way home at around 6 and 7 p.m. And the neighbours, I think, create for us personally the most fantastic living environment right here at the end of our street in Amber Ridge. You're probably wondering about this lovely chess set up in front of me. One of the folks who lives locally arrived here unannounced one day and said that he felt it was time to hand over his beloved father's handmade chess set, and he wanted to pass it on to me. I was quite overwhelmed by the gesture, and I'm hoping that in this video you can see the detail of these magnificent, magnificent chess pieces involved, including these that are all fashioned and made in the form of African pieces. Here's a African riding an elephant, African queen, and of course then these more Anglo-sized or westernized pieces on this side of the board. What an incredible gesture from a man who I certainly don't know well but like to call a friend. And I'm so touched by the gesture. And I know that I'm going to get great pleasure playing with this quite extraordinary and very unique chess set in the days that lie ahead. Now, the folks who know me well know that my father passed away when I was at university. And I then went to live with a very special family in the Mooi River area called the Holcrofts, who were incredibly hospitable and kind to all about them, including myself. And they used to host a big Sunday lunch with generally roast meat on a Sunday. And Mike never had a decent knife for the carving of the Sunday meat. So I went and bought him a knife, and every fortnight or so I would diligently sharpen the knife on my Lansky sharpener. Well, Mike tragically was to pass away on the 5th of October of 2000. And the knife, of course, remained with his wife and family in the farmhouse. And isn't it incredible to consider that 20 years on, his dear wife, Paddy, arrived here one day with the beautiful carving knife and said, "Rob, I think it's time that the knife came back to you." Now, I love knives. I always have. I love cutlery. I love sharpening them. This knife required considerable sharpening when I got it back. But this is partly why I've come back to the Natal Midlands, because of its people, its history, indeed, in my life, and because I feel like an integral part of this community. And here in Howick, you may or may not be aware, we have what's called the Midlands Forum that began years ago largely as a forum aimed at women. It is hosted in the local high school hall, my old school. And indeed, they have probably 600 active members and have indeed regularly 500 members at the hall to listen to a speaker once a month. This, of course, pre-COVID. They've embraced the online world and have hosted talks monthly online ever since lockdown began on the 26th of March of this year. And I'm always delighted by the vibrant, energetic, delightful human being who heads up the forum, called Mary Carlisle, because she normally stands up to greet the gathering and says, "Good morning, lots of grey hair over lots of grey matter." And that really is important, because the intellectual horsepower, the collective intellectual horsepower of these communities, with remarkable men and women from all over our country who have chosen to settle here, is quite extraordinary. And when you just tap in to this collective intellect and this collective experience, it really is a very unique situation. I always feel I learn more from them than they'll ever learn from me. And it is a crying shame for me that the municipality, for example, don't tap into this deep well of experience, expertise, and knowledge, and indeed use it to the benefit of the local community and the local municipality. Here in our little estate, we have quite a lot of wildlife. And of course, the wildlife gets incredibly habituated and used to people. Some people might be reserved about that. But we have the woolly neck storks, one behind me in the video. We have warthog that come for their daily feed around the house and have got incredibly calm and tame, along with blessbuck and impala, little grey duiker. We have porcupine sightings quite regularly, and serval, and of course the striped donkeys, as I call them, the zebras, and make themselves at home on our lawns, and indeed even come onto the verandas. And they're a real pest, because every time you clean out and refill your water baths and bird baths, the zebras will come by and indeed consume all the water in one hit and then move on to the following garden. So the wildlife here is a special treat. Right next door to us we have Pavula Wildlife Estate, and I'm able to sit on my front veranda and look out with binoculars or the naked eye and see all sorts of wildlife on the other side of the fence, including red hartebeest. And I always dreamed of having a home, indeed with a view, where you could pick up binoculars and look at wildlife. Admittedly, it's not the big five wildlife, but in terms of a space for human beings and animals, this is a quite extraordinary place to live. And when I chose to move on from Fugitives Drift Lodge, indeed in September of 2011, it was always a place I wanted to return to, was the Natal Midlands. We initially hoped to build a home on Garlington and realized that it was probably out of our reach financially. So we rented a house in Amber Valley, indeed from the very special lady who returned this knife to me. And very quickly we became happy enough in this environment, surrounded by wonderful neighbors, that we felt it would be a fine place to live on account of my spending an awful lot of time away from home. And when Karen and I are away collectively, we want a safe place for our home and our possessions. And we decided to build a home up in Amber Ridge that we moved into in March of 2013. And I want to tell you, it's been 9 of the happiest years of our lives here in Howick. And I have no doubt that that trend is going to continue into the future, surrounded by this incredible climate, remarkable people, the wonderful wildlife, and indeed the geography, the location of Natal in the greater scheme of things. At 3,500 feet, we have a marvelous climate, close to the Drakensberg, striking distance down to the sea, close enough to the game reserves, and a really, really special place to be. And I hope you've enjoyed that little summation of my experiences here and why I love this place so much. And I hope you will remain on the storytelling journey with us as we continue into February and 2021, which we hope is going to be a much better year than last. Thank you very much.